Well, I'm Sisey Kattelman, and I was born in Omaha, Nebraska at the Methodist Hospital. My parents were living in Council Bluffs, but my mother used a doctor in Omaha, and so that's where I came into the world. Now, my given name is Harriet Maxine. I was named after two deceased great uncles. I've been known as Sissy ever since I was a baby, and but in school they called me Harriet. And when I run into friends from school, they often still refer to me by that name. My mother was born in 1904 in Burlington, Iowa, and her parents emigrated from Lithuania, an area called Vilna, and I have pictures of even her grandparents came to this country to settle in Burlington on her Gross. Her maiden name was Rose Gross, and her married name was Rose Gross Kattelman. Her parents her dad was in the furniture business in Burlington, and unfortunately he died the year that I was born. Her mother was her mother's maiden name was Kaplan, and she had several relatives in Des Moines, and she lived until around, I would say, I might have been around 5 years old when she died. I had one brother. He passed away in I think 94, and he was 61 years old at the time. He was born in 1933, and my dad was in the hardware business in Council Bluffs, and my dad was born in Council Bluffs. His parents emigrated from Kiev. There were 12 siblings in my father's family. He was the oldest, and we just lost the last of the 12 this year. And my dad, everybody worked in Council Bluffs. My grandparents had a scrap business, but I think originally he had a push cart. And that's how they started life in Council Bluffs. All the children were born there. They were born upstairs of a firehouse, not too far from the railroad tracks. And the entertainment that the kids had was to listen to the railroads come and go, and they could tell you from the whistle which train it was and if it was early or late. And Council Bluffs was known as a railroad town in those days, so there were many, many trains there. They knew every single one of them. And I grew up on, my family lived on 624 South 6th Street in Council Bluffs until I was 10 years old. And I went to Bloomer School. And at Bloomer from kindergarten through 9th grade, and I could walk to school. It was close. And when I was 10, my parents bought a home on 9th Street, 215 South 9th, and that was even closer to Bloomer. That was only a block away. So I went there until I was through with 9th grade, and then I went to A.L. High School, and that was on 5th Avenue, and that was up the hill. And since I graduated from A.L. in Council Bluffs, they have built a new high school and tore down the one that I went to. And let's see, and then after I graduated high school, I went to the University of Iowa, and I started school in the fall of '52, and I graduated in '56 with a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology. And I lived in Currier Hall my freshman year, and then I was a member of SDT, and so I lived in the sorority house for the last 3 years. After I graduated, I came back to Council Bluffs and went to work in our hardware store. I was originally offered a job to go to Dixon, Illinois to work at a home for special needs children, which would have required me to go back to get my master's, and I wasn't ready mentally, physically, or otherwise. My attitude wasn't ready to go back to school. So I came back to Council Bluffs, and I went into the family business. And in 1961, I lost my dad. He was 67 years old, and he had a heart attack. And so my mother and I continued the business, and we kept it going for a long time. Now, when I think in 1950, our hardware store was on Main Street, and it was part of a group of several buildings, and there had been a little bar in the building next door but the walls were connected, and they had a fire, and it started a fire on the whole block, and unfortunately our hardware store went with it. So in 1950, we bought the property on Broadway, 714 West Broadway, and we built the store there, and it continued there until about, I'd say 20 years ago, probably more than 20 years, it's about 20 years ago, the interstate, the state rather, came through and changed the routing of Broadway and built Canesville. And that took our block where our business was. And so my mother and I decided that was the time, rather than to relocate, we just liquidated, and that was the end of Kattelman Hardware. But to this day, I run into people I all the time in Council Bluffs, and they all tell me how much they miss the store and how much they miss my mother. My mother passed away in '98, and she was 94 years old at that time. She lived in her home on 9th Street until 9 months before her death, and at which time she went to the Bloomkin home, but I kept her house, thinking that if she ever wanted to go back to it, it was there for her to go. And as a matter of fact, the weekend before she died, we had her back at the house to look things over and to see. And some of her friends came over to see her there. And anyhow, somewhere along the line, about 1975, Howard and I got married, and he was with the Omaha World Herald, and when we married, we lived at the Twin Towers between Douglas and Farnham on 30th Street. And in fact, we were married there. We were married in our apartment on the 7th floor by Rabbi Nadoff. And it was a very special evening. We had an eclipse of the moon that night, and there was a big fire on the interstate. Because we lived on the original roof, we had a great view of the city. So anyhow, we had 70 very close friends and relatives at our wedding, and the following day we had a reception for many of our friends at Lakeshore Country Club in Council Bluffs. And so it wasn't so, what year did we move here, Howard? In 1981 or something. 1981, we moved to Bellevue, and it was a total departure from how we lived before. We were right in the middle of the city with all the noise and excitement of city life, and then we came out here where it's very peaceful, and we have deer and wild turkey and fox and wonderful animals and lots of birds, and it's home, and we enjoy it here. Well, we don't always stay home because we do a lot of traveling, and we have been doing that. Howard did a lot of traveling for his work because he was the military affairs editor, so he would travel to many of the bases around the world, and often would travel with the commander-in-chief from the base. But when he was traveling just for the paper for a story and that I could go along, then I did that too, and that was a lot of fun. Howard has 2 children from a former marriage, and they're 2 girls, and one lives in Minneapolis and is married to her name is Irene, and she's married to a fellow named Steve Roos, who's a wonderful young man. And Lori is the youngest daughter, lives in San Diego. Her husband is Jim May, and he's an attorney, and they have 2 boys, and the boys are terrific. They're 6 and 8. We just took a wonderful trip with them this summer. We all went to Alaska and did a cruise, and we don't get to see them as often as we'd like because they do live away, but we talk to them all the time. And as far as our travels, we're just returning now from South America, but we've probably been all over the world. I haven't been to Antarctica, but Howard has. And other than that, I don't know if there's any place that we haven't been together, but we still aren't satisfied because we're going back for more. And if there's anything else you want to know, tell me.
There's a couple things. I want to know how you and Howard met.
How we met, okay. Well, Howard, my brother knew Howard when Howard was married to his first wife, and I don't know how they met, but I know that they were friends, and they used to do things with their families together. But I really didn't know him very much through that, because they used to do things together. Then I can't remember, I think it was on a 4th of July when I went over to your house when he had his other family, and they were doing fireworks at that time, and I think I had a date as well, so it wasn't romance. I mean, there was nothing there were no sparks, let's put it that way. There was nothing going on at that time. But then I think it was probably a few years later then, probably, that he just called me one time and said that he was leaving home. So that was, and I don't know, we just had a lot in common. It's kind of interesting because I didn't even know Howard was Jewish. I had no idea that he was, you know, and I was so shocked to find out that he was, because I just, you know, you know, his wife wasn't, and he didn't live a Jewish life at that time, so it was not, I just didn't know that he was. But anyhow, our first date was, he took us, he was going out to the base to interview, was it Ford? Yeah, President Ford was coming in. And so he wanted to know if I wanted to go out and meet the president. Well, or I don't think I met the president, but I did go out to the base, to the base with him. And then I don't know, we just had so many things in common, and we really just enjoyed each other so much that one thing led to another, and the rest is history. Now, we've been married 28 years now, so it's obviously something we've got all these, you know, we have a lot of common interests, and we're enjoying our retirement. And you want to know how I got my dog? I can tell you about my dog.
Sure, I'd like to hear that.
Well, I'll tell you that when I was growing up, we always had dogs, always. In fact, I was raised by an Irish setter, literally. My mother used to go to the hardware store with my dad and help him, you know, out. And the dog used to take me to kindergarten and pick me up afterwards and bring me home. Literally. The dog knew how to, he just knew what time it was to go to school. And that, he raised me. His name was Red. Well, he died, he was about 10, I think, maybe, when he died. Well, then we didn't have a dog for quite a while. I think we might have had a cat. We had a cat and maybe a couple more cats. And then later in maybe 7th, 8th grade, then there was a stray dog that I adopted again, and that one came to live with us, and his name was Pat. And he was a beagle, and he was very smart too, and he knew when the 10 o'clock news was on, it was time to go outside. My dogs are all smart. This one listens to me too. Anyhow, I had him for a long time. I never knew how old he was because he was full grown when he came to live with us. But my dad was crazy. My folks were crazy about him too. My dad would walk him all the time, and he was a wonderful dog too. Well, then Howard and I never had a dog the whole time we were married because, for one thing, we lived in the apartment in Twin Towers, and for another thing, then we started traveling so much, so we just couldn't think about having a dog. Well, one day he was in a building where he and Sam Freed had a little business going, and there was a fellow that was doing telemarketing for them, and he came in with carrying this dog. I mean, and he said that he was a young man that was going to college, and he was doing telemarketing, and he was living in an apartment building, and the dog would bark when he wasn't there, and they told him either he left or that he had to get rid of the dog. So Howard brought the dog home, which was wonderful. I was surprised that Howard would do it. I would have brought it home in a minute, but I was surprised that he did, because he, you know, it was a wonderful thing, except it kind of caught us all by surprise because we were leaving town in a few days, so we had to hurry and find a place to board him and keep him, you know, but he's been a wonderful friend to us. He's 13 years old now, and he was, I think, 2 years old when he came to live with us. Now, you wonder what we do with our dog when we travel all the time.
I was thinking that.
We've got a wonderful friend called Leo Camisar. Do you know Leo? And Leo, God, he's a god, is what he is. Turk goes and lives with him. Leo has a little poodle, Sadie, and Leo takes care of both dogs. They both sleep in bed with him, and you sit on all his chairs, and he's so good to him. He's so wonderful, and so we're really blessed with having a friend like that. We've got lots of wonderful friends, but that's a very special one. And let's see what else you want to know about me.
I want to hear a little bit about growing up in Council Bluffs.
Okay, about
the family and
yeah. Well, let's see. You know, growing up in Council Bluffs, my father was an Orthodox Jew, and we kept kosher in our home. And yet all my friends were non-Jewish, and I would go out and carol on Christmas, carol with my friends and that, and my parents never objected to that. They never thought that was going to hurt me, and at all, in one way or the other. It never bothered them at all. I can't say that I've ever experienced anything very prejudicial in Council Bluffs. I don't think that other than hearing somebody say in my store, a Jew down a price or something like that, and that is done from ignorance. I don't think it was, it's just a farmer talking like he heard his parents talk or something. And it wasn't meant to be disrespectful to me at all. In fact, they probably didn't even realize it when they say it. It's just part of their language. But I don't ever remember being denied any privilege. I belonged to Job's Daughters, which was a Masonic thing, I don't ever remember anything that I, couldn't do because I was Jewish. I don't ever, if I did, you would think that would stick in your mind, but I just can't say that. My friends were all non-Jews. I had some Jewish friends that were in my class in school. There was only one other Jewish kid, Buddy Rothman, was the only one in my class. There were a few that were behind me 1 year, a few that were ahead of me a couple of years, but my friends were all non-Jews. And I did, in high school, I did join one of those Jewish youth groups at the old JCC on 20th Street, Councillettes. Now, you know what? I don't remember a hell of a lot about it either. I remember going. I think they were it was Sunday meetings, but I can't tell you a lot about what we did. I know we had like a program, a fun night, or they did a review or something, you know. But I can't remember what the skit was or anything. But I remember belonging to that, and there were some, you know, gals that I run into now that I knew in those days when they were young. I call everybody by their maiden name because that's how I remember them. By their, name, with, you know, of their girlhood. And
did you have a lot of relatives living in Council Bluffs?
Yeah, I had, actually, most of them did. My father's brother Sam Kattelman, who was next to him. Jenny Bear lived in Omaha. Joe Kattelman lived in Council Bluffs. Morris Kattelman, for a while lived out in California, and then he came back and he lived in Omaha. Abe Kattelman lived in Council Bluffs and had the foundry, Kattelman Foundry. Toby Kattelman married Nate Richards later in life. Originally, she had been married briefly to a rabbi, Carl Castle, and that that marriage was terminated, but it wasn't a very long marriage. And she married Nate Richards, who was a widower, and they lived in Council Bluffs. Marion Kattelman she married a fellow from California, so she lived in L.A., and she passed away as well. They're all gone. And who am I forgetting, Howard, from those? Sam, I mentioned Sam, but Sam was married to Goldie Marcus, and that was the family that was from Council Bluffs, Marcuses. Unfortunately, all these people are buried in our Council Bluffs cemetery, so there's a lot of history in that cemetery there. Sam was involved in the clothing, and his sons, you know, the clothing stores. They had Stanley's, they had, and Sam's daughter Lee was married to Sam Ebeloff, and they had a department store called Marcus Department Store. And that was all in the Bluffs. Everything was in the Bluffs there. There was one brother that was in between some of the older ones. He was 4 years old, and he was run over by I think a fire truck. Yeah, that way back at the turn of the century. And then there was a sister that died she was young too. Fanny was her name. So it was a big family, the Kattelman family. Now there were a lot of cousins, and that's what Joel has been doing the research on. See, Joel's dad and my dad were first cousins, and their fathers were brothers. But there were and my grandmother Kattelman was a Kattelman from birth. So my grandparents were both Kattelman, and they were first cousins when they married. So that meant that there were Kattelmans on both sides of the family. So it's a big family. There's still several of the ones from my grandmother's side of the family, like Libby Epstein, who you knew from, who used to live in Omaha, Jeanette Van, you know, and that's all from my grandmother's side of the family. And then there were the ones that were the Las Vegas group, like Belden and they had the El Rancho Vegas, and Harris, who is with the movie industry. That was on my grandmother's side of the family. Those are all Kattelman. And then on my father's side of the family, we had all of the ones that are the ones that I've listed, but then you have the ones that were part of Joel's parents, and he had several aunts and uncles. And then there was another. They had another brother, and his name was Max, and he lived in Lincoln, and his widow was Bess Kattelman, and she died maybe 15 years ago. But anyhow, Max is the one that I'm named. My middle name is named after. There was another brother that had two daughters, Anne and Ella, and they were not twins, but they were very, very close, and they lived downtown in Omaha in a very quiet life. One of them worked in the Brandeis bookstore, and the other one worked at, I think, Herzberg's. And they didn't do very much with the family. They were very private people.
They never married.
No, that's right. These two gals, they always lived together, and they were very private as far as about family was concerned, you know. And in later years, I made a point of getting to know them a little bit, and I'm only sorry I didn't do it earlier. But I really didn't even hardly know they existed, you know. And once I did, then I did make, an overture. I tried to do some nice things for them. And anyhow, they both ended up in the Blumkin home, and they passed away there too. Most of that generation is gone now, unfortunately. There's a few. My Uncle Abe's widow, Lucille, is still alive, and she was a Krasny. And my Uncle Morris's widow, Millie, is still alive, and she lives in Omaha, and her son, Rick, has the antique business in Omaha. And
there must have been a time in Council Bluffs when, between the Krasnys and the Kattelman,
there were a lot. Well, see, that's right. And when Lucille married Abe, then you had that was a merger. Yeah, that's right. The Krasny family was an enormous family. But you know, when you talk about the synagogue in Council Bluffs, it used to be really a thriving community. There were a lot of families there, and most of them were in business, but they were hard-working people. Primarily, they were in the grocery business. Almost every family was in the grocery business. Kattelman family never was, but I think every other family in Council Bluffs at one time or another had a grocery store, including the Krasnys, because they had one in the People store. I mean, there was even a grocery store there. And I remember when we would go to the synagogue in Council Bluffs, originally it was Orthodox, and the women had to sit upstairs. And then as it my mother was the maverick. She decided one year that she was going to come downstairs and sit. And so she did, and pretty soon almost everybody did, but there were two families that wouldn't do it. And one was the Krasny, it was Leah Krasny, who is, ultra-Orthodox, and God love her, I think she's still alive. She's got to be 100 years old now. And the other one was Fanny Gordon, and she was from the Scheichen family, and they were very religious and had always been observant that way, and so they remained upstairs, but everybody else came downstairs to sit, and that's how that synagogue has gone through so many changes that it's been everything. But God loved the few that are still hanging in there. We were there Friday night, this last Friday night, because I had your site for my dad. And it was Hanukkah. That's the way I can always remember that, he died during Hanukkah. But this year they're going to observe the 100th anniversary of that synagogue. At the 50th, they wrote a book about, it's called The Golden Book, I think. And now it's 50 years later, and Sandy Curlin is updating that material, and they're not just talking about the synagogue. They're talking about all the families, what they did for a living, what their children are doing. It's quite an undertaking, and she's been at the library doing all this research, and that might be somebody you might want to talk to too, because she's done quite a bit of research. She was telling me about it this week. I had no idea what all that's involved with that. I had a bas mitzvah when I was 12 years old. I think I was the first one in Council Bluffs. And it was, I don't know how memorable it was. I remember it, but I mean, everybody thought it was really something, the fact that, but my father insisted that I have a bas mitzvah, so I had a bas mitzvah. And it was fine. It was okay. But I think I was 12 when they did that. And, of course, my brother had a bar mitzvah. And I think everybody in those days, they all, that synagogue was for that purpose. And there were some weddings there. Now, I have to tell you, too, that in our house on 9th Street, we had a wedding. My mother had a cousin, Friedman, from, they lived in Hamburg, Iowa. It was her uncle, Abe Friedman, Abe and Fanny. Now, Fanny was a Gross, so that was her blood relative, a Gross side. And they had a daughter who was a pilot during World War II. She used to fly for the
ferry pilot.
Yeah, what was it?
Ferrying planes.
Yeah, yeah, she was quite yeah. And anyhow, she met a serviceman, and they wanted to get married, and they asked my mother if she wouldn't have that in her home. And we had, I remember I was a little kid. I mean, I probably was 12 or 13 years old, maybe. I don't know, maybe younger than that. But it was very nice. We had a nice rabbi. We've had some interesting rabbis in Council Bluffs. Now, I don't know if you're going to edit this, but I'll tell you about one. And you've probably heard about him. We had we've had some wonderful rabbis there. We had Rabbi Leifer that was just a doll, and he was a single man. And I remember that my mom would invite him over on Fridays to eat. He was a very nice, lovely man. And I think in later life he probably got married. But we had a rabbi, and his last name was Friedman, and he was quite an interesting man. And one day my dad got a phone call from the police that he was in jail because he was a window peeper, peeping Tom. So my father had to go bail him out. Well, needless to say, I don't think he stayed in Council Bluffs very long after that. But now, see, I have forgotten so many things, but that I have always remembered. And I understand that he went on to become kind of an interesting, I mean, he got a very good job down south somewhere, and became like a circuit rabbi or something that was really did outstanding things, you know. But he did outstanding things in Council Bluffs as well. But, oh God, well, that's one that I do remember. Let's see what else I can tell you.
Joe's promise.
The what? Oh, Joe Kattelman. Yeah, my Uncle Joe, he was a real character, and he was a lot of fun. I have to tell you that he was single until he was, I don't know, maybe 40, maybe older. And my mother had a cousin that lived in Albuquerque, Jeanette Katz was her name, and she came from my brother's bar mitzvah. And my mother made an introduction, and they got married. And they had a wonderful marriage for a lot of years until, of course, he died. But they did have a great marriage. Well, he loved politics, and he loved real estate. And for him, it was kind of a game he would go to these auctions where they were, tax sales and that. And if there was a piece of property that was for sale, he'd buy it. And he was just a terrific, wonderful guy, and he was fodder for the newspaper, because he'd fall asleep at a meeting, you know, or he went on the city council. He was an alderman first when they had that kind of government. Then he was voted in as city councilman. Then he was the mayor for a while, Council Bluffs. And but they called him the watchdog because he was very interested in Council Bluffs. Not so much for himself, but he truly believed in Council Bluffs. Just as I consider myself a Council Bluffian, even though I live on this side of the river. You know, my heart belongs there. I've got there's a book here that Bill Ramsey wrote about Council Bluffs, and there's some great stories about Joe in there. So if you want to take that and read it, you're welcome to. Howard's got a story about him.
No, well, yeah, he once, the managing editor, the former retired now, the Nonpareil told me.
Frank Lane, wasn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
That they had a story in that Joe owned 2,300 pieces of property in Council Bluffs. And Joe came into the office that afternoon storming with a copy of the paper in his hand. That's personal business. You had no right to broadcast or publish my private information. And he said, besides that, it's 4,000 pieces.
That was Joe. He was very colorful. but he was really a pussycat. But boy, he could roar sometimes. You know, he would roar. He was a lot of fun. Each and every one was different. None of them looked alike or acted alike. They all had totally different personalities. Abe was just a pussycat. You know, he was a wonderful guy, and Sam lived to ripe old age. I think he was 96 years old when he died. And he married Inez Cohn was his second. You know, he was widowed for all those years, and then he married Inez, and they had a nice life. They lived down in Arizona after they retired and moved away from Council Bluffs. And Abe was married twice too. His first wife, Edna, he married, I don't know what year it was, but they weren't married very long. She, poor thing, she got sick. Well, I'll tell you when she died, because I was graduating high school then, so it was 1952. They probably weren't married more than a couple of years, and she got cancer and she died. She was still young. And then a few years after that, he married Lucille, and Marion was married to a man in L.A., Jules Whale, and the two of them were in the lamp parts business, and they named their business after grandma, the Rosa they called it, and my grandma's name was Rosa. Rissy was her Jewish name, but Rosa was her English name, and my grandfather's name was Julius, and I may have some, I don't have a picture of them, but on my mother's side of the family I do. My parents were married in 1929, and they were married in St. Louis, and they went to the World Series. The World Series was in St. Louis that year, and they were baseball fans. The Cardinals were playing. So they went to the World Series on their honeymoon. And what else can I tell you?
On your mother's side of the family, there was Sam Gross.
Oh, yeah.
Who was an All-American quarterback at Iowa in 1915.
That was her. That was her uncle. That was her youngest uncle. There were. We used to have a Gross reunion, but we haven't had one lately. But I'll tell you, we do have Kattelman. We have what we call a cousins club for the Kattelmans, and we usually get about 20 people together every once in a while and go. We have dinner out
here in Omaha.
Yeah, and it's fun. We don't do it real often. We probably should do it more often. When my Aunt Toby was still at the home, we did a little cousins club birthday party for her, and I'm glad we did, because she died shortly after that. So, you know, it was nice to do that. And then we had one since when Art Epstein had a birthday. We had one, and we've got a lot of relatives around. You know, they're not all Kattelman, but they've got Kattelman kin there somewhere. What else can I tell you? Now I'll tell you about the Kattelman name. Some of us spell it E-L and some spell it L-E. Now in our family, we spell it E-L, and our cousins use the LE. Well, looking at some of my dad's papers when he went into the service, he was in World War I noticed that his name was spelled LE, and we've always been spelling it EL. And no one ever had a real good explanation of why it was sometimes it's one way, sometimes it's another. But my Uncle Abe came up with the best explanation. We think we'll stick with this one. He said that when his dad went into business, he had a sign painted, and it was spelled Kattelman, and they thought maybe it was cheaper just to change the name and keep the sign the way it was than to order a new sign. So that's how we came up with the name Kattelman, and we're stuck with it. And we're all family anyhow. Everybody's the same. Now, Ben asked me about my brother. He was born in May of 1933, and he was a year and a half older than I am, and he was an exceptionally good student. When he was in his primary grades, he skipped 2 classes. He was a year and a half ahead of his classmates when he graduated from high school. He was different, let's put it that way. He had a fascination for show business and things that you probably wouldn't always find in Council Bluffs. You know, he wanted the life of Las Vegas or big city, and he had a vivid imagination, and it was didn't always prove to his benefit. And he unfortunately he couldn't always put his life together the way he wanted it to be. Graduated high school and went off to Iowa, and he was only there, and he pledged the Phi-Up House, and he was only there for a year, maybe less than a year, and he came back, and then he went into University of Omaha, called Omaha U then, and he was there maybe a year, and then he didn't, he just couldn't put it together. And it was too bad because the potential was there. He was an extremely bright fellow, but he just couldn't do it. Well, anyhow, I don't know, there were years that I was gone for 4 years, so I can't, then he did go into the service. He was in the service, he was stationed in Japan, and this was after the Korean War. And he did do some things with the Stars and Stripes when he was
the newspapers.
Yeah, over there, and I think he enjoyed his time in Japan. I think, and he was producing some interesting stories and that, and I think that was good for him. Well, anyhow, he got out of the service and he came back, and then he got married in, I don't know what year. Do you remember, Howard?
No.
I don't remember, but he was probably about 25 maybe when he got married. And he married a gal from Des Moines, and her name is Annette Villarilla. And they had 3 children, and the kids are terrific. They all live in the San Francisco area. The oldest one, Tracy, is an environmentalist. She graduated from Berkeley and is very happy with her work. And Lisa, the middle one, is an architect. She graduated from Lincoln. And Steve also went to the University of Nebraska, and he graduated in advertising. And and Lisa lives in Sea Ranch, Gualala, California. And Steve is in San Francisco. And they're wonderful kids, and that's quite a legacy. Well, anyhow, Bud, real name is Abram. Somewhere after he came back from the service, he wanted everybody to call him Buddy Dundee, and I don't think he changed his name legally, but he used that name, and it was, and everybody knew him by that name, so I would call him Dundee as well. I think he probably named it after the neighborhood in Omaha. They lived in a home that my mother provided for them in Omaha, and the kids were growing up, and they all went to high school and college, and anyhow, they divorced. He and Annette divorced several years ago, and he still was trying to find himself, and he would go back to Council Bluffs and live with his mother, my mother, Rosie, and she provided for him, and it was just kind of a sad situation. And unfortunately, that's where he died. She found him. He had a heart attack. It's something that goes with the Kattelman family. Everybody in the family succumbs to the same disease. So, unfortunately, he did too. He was young, and it's too bad. He had a lot of potential. He left a wonderful legacy of children, though, and so for that we're grateful. And that's the story of Buddy Dundee. He's buried in the Council Bluffs cemetery with next to his parents, and that's where he is.
I'm Howard Silber, and I married into the Kattelman family in 1975. I married Sisey, and it's been a real joy ever since. It's been the most wonderful life that anybody could imagine. We've done so many things together that we've enjoyed. What else can I say? It's terrific to this day, and it will continue to be.
Yeah, we've got a lot of friends that we see and get together with, and we do a lot of traveling, of course. And we're just coming back from one trip, and now we're getting ready to go on another one.
True. And we've got another one. We're going to the Far East in May, and in next November, I'm hoping that we can go to France and take part in a ceremony in a village in eastern France, which I was with an army unit that liberated the village, and they're asking us to come back for a special ceremony. Hopefully we can do that.
And we might tell them that we did revisit your area of your war years. And what, you remember when that was?
It was about 16 years ago. We were in Germany for other reasons, and we crossed into France, the province of Alsace, or Alsace, which had been batted back and forth between France and Germany for a century or more. And we did visit places that I had been, including a place where I was wounded and where the war ended for me. And it was very interesting.
And at that time, we picked up a neighbor that was working over there at that time, and he was fluent in German. So he traveled with us, and it made it really interesting, and we could have a lot of conversations with locals that way. And we even saw what I thought was remarkable was that Howard, we were looking for a cemetery where there was a special battle. And we were asking locals where that cemetery might be, and they kept telling us on the far side of town or whatever. And Howard says, no, it's up on a hill. I remember going up on, he says, go up this hill here. And sure enough, that's where the cemetery was. He remembered it after all those years, where they had that battle. And at that time there were two women, remember, that were visiting or decorating the graves there, and one of them had been just a child at the...
That was in Klimbach, where I was wounded.
Yeah, and tell her about where the soldiers, when they went down into the basement and her...
Oh, we were working with, I was in an infantry company, and we were working with a tank destroyer company that was black, Negro, which wasn't done very much in those days. And it was all segregated, and they were in their own outfit. They did have a couple of white officers. And after the battle for Klimbach ended, these women told us, one of them was a child, or both of them were children then, but this one who was telling the story, they had gone into their cellar, and those cellars there were constructed of stone. They were pretty, they were like fortresses, so they were safe. But then finally, the shooting stopped, and they heard a church bell ring, so they went up, and they saw black soldiers, and they had never seen African Americans before, or anybody from Africa. And one woman said, I thought I was dead, that I was in hell, and there was the devils.
Because they had never seen a black face before. Yeah.
What is the name of this village you're going to visit?
Well, the village I'm going to visit is Sisey-sur-Meurthe, Sisey on the Meurthe River, and it is at the in the Vosges Mountains. The nearest community of any size is called Saint-Dié, and we crossed the Meurthe River on the morning before dawn of November 22nd, 1944, and took both Saint-Dié and Sisey, the much smaller place. It happened that my platoon was in Sisey, and it was there actually where that little cemetery is, where the battle was fought, and we lost quite a few men. So my own company association, which is still in existence, in spite of the fact that there aren't too many of us left, erected our own monument to the guys, dedicated to the guys who lost their lives there. And we've had some sort of relationship with the people of Sisey ever since. And now they've invited us back for the 60th anniversary for of their liberation for a special ceremony. And again, hopefully we'll get there.
Howard, I think when we were in Germany just this summer, weren't we going to go to Sisey? We were.
I had arranged to rent a car from Strasbourg and drive up there. It's about probably 50 kilometers. And but the Rhine, we run a river cruise on the Rhine, and there'd been a drought, and the Rhine was so low that they had to change the itinerary.
Yeah,
and
so
we couldn't go to Strasbourg on the boat.
no, we were bused into Strasbourg, and on a different day, and that was on our way to our final destination. So we couldn't, you know, leave the.
We were supposed to have had a full day.
Yeah.
There.
So that was too bad, because he really did want to represent his company, you know, Company A.
Well, hopefully we can do it again. We'll do it in November, and some of the other fellows might be able to go too. I hope so.
That'd be wonderful.
Well, it's been a delight talking to both of you, Howard and Sisey.
Well, we enjoyed having you.
Pleasure for us.
Yeah,
Really.
we'll have to. You'll have now that you know how to get here. You have to come back more often.